like Adam Coleman. Adam B. Coleman is the author of The Children We Left Behind. He's on Substack, Speaking Wrong at the Right Time at adambcoleman.com. And he's been on our show several times. We're glad to have him back. What's up, Adam?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me back on.
You bet. This time with a brand new book that comes out tomorrow, The Children We Left Behind. Part memoir, part societal diagnosis and analysis. You really kind of start with your own experience, Adam, of not having your dad a part of your life. I don't know how to ask you this question and not a big open-ended, boom, tell me what that was like or tell me why that inspired you. But it was clearly like a thing that you've carried with you into who you are as an adult and who you are as a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes you don't realize how much it impacts you until you become an adult and you have the hindsight to kind of look back and see all the hurdles you had to go over. But yeah, I struggled a lot with my mental health. At the age of 8, I went into a mental hospital because I expressed suicidal ideation to my mother. Actually, writing this book allowed for me to talk to my family and talk to my mother about these different experiences to make sure that my memory is correct. And she told me something that I didn't remember. She told me that I told her, "If you love me, you'll help me die." And that's what helped to prompt her to go to professionals. And the professionals told her to have me admitted into the hospital. And I was there for 3 months. Um, so these were memories that I blocked out for many years because they were very painful. It took me a long time to even tell people about it, to write about it. I thought about writing about it in my first book, but I couldn't write about it and talk about these experiences without crying. So it took years to kind of resolve just that particular issue, to even
Mm.
have this conversation with you without, crying my eyes out.
And how much of that, looking back, I mean, you're 8 years old, suicidal ideation is a complex thing with many different contributing factors. But the one thing you're talking about here is the absence of your father. So how much of all that was driven by you ask the questions, you do it right off the bat in your book, like this, it's what seems like it feels like a real sense of rejection. Like, why don't you want me? Why don't you want to be around me? Why don't you ask questions about my life? That kind of stuff. Was it just a sense of like, why don't you like me?
Yeah, I think what led for me to get into the hospital was a mixture of my father not being there, um, and also for my mother feeling the need to make certain changes so she can take care of us, needing the help. We were staying with family members, but in some of those situations, we weren't really wanted. In one particular case, we abruptly left after a family member was screaming at me. I was a small kid, and we proceeded to be homeless for a little bit. So, my mental breakdown happened after we finally, after months, got back into an apartment and we were safe. But like, moving between 3 states in about 2 years, and being homeless takes a dramatic toll, and you don't know how to process
Hmm.
that. And I think that not having my father there to protect us, to be an economic provider, other than what he was paying through child support, um, not having him there as an emotional support as well to look out for us, I think that also contributed.
You know, you talk about in the book that your dad died, so you didn't get direct answers to these questions, but you've lived a life now and you've acquired wisdom. You've become a parent. You talk in the book about, first of all, your book is about the societal importance of family building, family structure, and parenthood, and what that takes. And there's some things I want to ask you about that in a minute. But, um,
Mhm.
you know, what do you think the answers are, Adam? Like, why do you think? And maybe you can only answer it through the wisdom of analyzing society instead of the personal analysis of your dad. But
Mhm.
what do you think the answers are? Why? Why did he? And what I think you characterize give you the minimum.
He didn't really want me. It's tough for a child to say that about their own father, but I don't feel that my father wanted me or really loved me. Um, and it took me a long time to accept that, one, and two, to understand and come to that conclusion because I became a father. and I see the amount of sacrifices it takes to be a good father, um, the amount of love it takes, the amount of care it takes, thinking about them, checking up on them, asking them how they're doing. That all that takes effort. And I don't think there's a such thing as a perfect parent, but there's a difference between a good parent and a bad parent. And a good parent cares. It's as simple as that. We all make mistakes as parents, and I wasn't expecting a perfect parent, but I just wanted a parent who tried, who cared. And I didn't get that. So I think
Mm.
the answer at the end of the day is that he didn't really want me. He wasn't really interested in being part of my life. And outside of my childhood, the last time I talked to him, I was 21. I was the one who called him. He wasn't really interested in talking to me. I never rejected his phone calls if he attempted to call me, but he never did. And so I didn't even find out he died until a few months after he died. My father disconnected from us. He wasn't that interested.
But you write about this, and okay, you say caring is what's necessary, just caring. I like how you wrote about this, Adam. You said, but parents are pacified with cliches to get a pass as a parent. Oh, it's difficult. Oh, you're doing your best, right? And I think that most of the parents, and here's what we have to do. We have to establish, first of all, there's such thing as success and failure as a parent, right? There's good and there's
Yeah.
bad. There's judgment. There's scales. And once we can establish that, then you can start kind of get into like what was bad. What saying you care isn't enough. I like this thing people always say is love is action. Love isn't an affirmation. It's not words. Love is an action.
Right.
Um, but you talk about like how selfishness is so prevalent in humanity and with parents that I think it allows people to get away with those cliches of I'm doing my best.
Yeah, the doing your best, but even more so, the most detrimental is if I'm not happy, my child's not happy, which is not how things work.
Mm.
Your kids automatically want to please you. Children are people pleasers, right? And if you say mommy and daddy would be happy apart, what do you think your kid's going to say? More likely they're going to act like they understand, but they don't. They don't understand adult relationships. They don't understand adult dynamics, which is why often they blame themselves for the separation of their own family. They blame themselves when their parents or one of their parents is no longer there or was never there. Maybe something was wrong with them. I went through that feeling of rejection, like something is wrong with me, hence why my father doesn't love me. So, I think the selfishness of parents finding all these excuses, and what makes it even worse is that there's a chapter in there called socially comfortable, terrible parents, where we have deadbeat dads, we have terrible moms, we have parents who beat their children, who scream at their children in front of other adults, and they get to go to the cookout and they get to hang out and lounge around with other adults, and no one calls them on it. They have family members who have secret kids, and everybody knows, but no one talks about it. Meanwhile, that child doesn't know who their father is or their mother is, right? So I think there is a social comfort in just keeping to yourself, even the people who are the closest to that terrible parent, to not say something about it. And they're thinking about the comfort of the adult who's doing the wrong thing instead of the discomfort of the child who's being forgotten.
Um, you make the argument that the societal necessity of the family is so deep that basically we need to give more thought into who you have children with and who you end up with, but also a less cavalier attitude toward divorce.
Yes, yes, absolutely. The well, we're going to split apart, but I'll put my kid in therapy is not enough. Um, I think every person who gets a divorce thinks that their situation is different. A lot of adults know truly what's going to happen to their kids. They know this is going to be a difficult circumstance, but they still go through it. And I believe the number one reason people get a divorce is because of money, but financial circumstances change all the time, right? So why are you leaving? Why are you separating? Why aren't you there to help support? If finances are an issue, it's going to be even worse for your kids when you split up and there's two households that require income. So I don't think that there are too many situations where divorces cannot be resolved. I've talked to many of people who've been together for 20 plus years, and they all say there was a moment that was really low and we thought we were going to separate, but we worked together and we're even better afterwards. All right, the
Mm.
lowering of pride, the sacrificing of yourself for something that's greater than yourself, your children, and resolving arguments that can be resolved. So I do think that I'm not one of those people that divorce should never be used. Obviously, there are circumstances for it, but not as many circumstances as people think.
I want to ask you about a couple of things because your book is not just about families; it does zero in on fatherhood a lot. So let's talk about
Mhm.
fatherhood.
Yeah.
Um, how do you? So I think you and I have had this conversation, Adam. Like, if we talk about one of the biggest things plaguing the Black community in America, it is the crisis of fatherlessness. And by fatherlessness, obviously, we mean father in the presence of the life of a child, or at least an intact family union. What are our stats right now, Adam? It's really high, right? Number of Black children born. Uh, is it without, quote unquote, without a father?
Yeah, it depends on which stat you look at. I've seen stats in the 60s, I've seen stats in the 70s. Um, and then you have people who'll say, well, just because they're not married doesn't mean that the father's not involved, which is true.
Hmm.
But for me, I wasn't married to my son's mother, but I was involved in his life. I had him every single weekend. I knew what was going on. We co-parented. We didn't fight, right? We had an ideal situation as far as co-parenting. But I will say, as much as I love and care for my son, I was always behind, right? When something happens on Tuesday and you get your kid on Saturday and you find out then,
Right.
you are always behind, right? So even if you are quote unquote involved and you see your kids, right? They needed you on Wednesday, not Saturday. And so I think there is a minimization of the importance of fathers being there, right? You're a good father if you see your kid every other weekend, right? Well, at least you're there. It's just this low expectation for father involvement and reducing us to pay pigs for our own kids. And as long as we can provide for our kids financially, then we deserve to see our kids. But if we're broke, we don't deserve to see them. It's that kind of situation.
What if would you agree with this, Adam? Like, if whatever problem affects whatever community, this is the most pronounced, like correlating factor, causational factor, even right. This is it.
Mhm.
So, if you identify a social ill within the Black community, it's hard to. And we're going to do other communities in a minute. I want to talk about something else, but
Mhm.
um, it's hard not to draw a direct line to, well, you have this really bad stat going on that is perpetuating these other social ills.
Yeah, exactly. Um, I think this is the root of it. It's not just fatherlessness. Because people try to, like I said, rationalize. Well, he's there just because we're not married. What they don't understand is that the greatest predictor is being married. Now, why is that the case? It's because the involvement is high. It's not that he comes over every once in a while and spends a couple hours with his kids. Is that the involvement is high, and the involvement is high makes it the success rate for their kids. It's not just that, there's a piece of paper that says they're married, right? You have a skin in the game when it comes to raising your kids when you are married. When you're not married, well, you can just exit, right? It's a lot easier. So I do think that people minimize the impact of marriage and why it's important. But yes, happy children aren't the ones who are, hitting other people, running down the street playing knockout game. Happy children aren't the ones who are stealing from your house and breaking into your car. Like these aren't happy children. These aren't satisfied kids. And I would venture to say
Right.
many of these kids have been abused in one form or another. A quick story, talking to an NYPD officer who spends a lot of times around perps, when their guard is down and they start talking, many of these young black men have been sexually abused throughout their childhoods. It's just that no one cares to hear them out.
Who is the perpetrator of those? Is there any commonality on that?
Mom's boyfriend, that the basically it's usually some sort of extended family member or mom's new boyfriend, or some sort of man who their mother is allowing into their home. The monster
Mm.
that they essentially allow into their home is the one who has access to them. And I think a lot of women don't realize that predators hunt their prey, and their children are actually the target, right? They're utilizing the relationship because the child is vulnerable in a single parent home, right? The mother can't be everywhere.
Wow.
The father's not around enough to protect the kid. And this is a circumstance that happens all of the time.
So I can't remember what comedian this was. I really can't. I'm just trying to think. It's because these days it's like it's a clip that scrolls across your screen, And but I
Mm.
watched it, and it was it was a comedian talking about dads, and he was like he was being funny, so who knows how serious he was being, but he was kind of downplaying the importance of fathers, like maybe he was talking up motherhood. I can't remember. But he said, like look at all the NFL players or the stars or this and that, who've done great things. No dad in the home. Like there's clearly like a hunger mentality to some of these guys, who maybe didn't have their dad. Obviously
Yeah.
it can go any number of ways, but one of the ways it can go is to create a human being who's a little more of a striver. Or I don't know what that. I don't even know if that's true, but this is what he was saying. But here's the point I'm getting to with you that made me kind of interested in it. What do you think? Like, I bet if we societally analyzed it and you said minutes devoted, the optimal healthy setting for a child, the mother is going to have a ton of minutes devoted to time with the kid. And the
Right.
dad wouldn't be a 1-to-1 correlation. It really just wouldn't. Because throughout history, dads have gone out, hunt, gather, work out of the home, whatever it may be. That's not to minimize the important role of a dad. I 100% believe it. But it's kind of interesting to think about what is the ideal involvement of the father. It isn't simply the same amount as the mother. So what is the answer?
Well, especially in economic times where, for many households, two incomes is necessary, it becomes a difficult balancing act. I don't think that there's an ideal situation for every single household. You know, Obviously, we have to make enough money to take care of our families. That's what it is. But I do think that there's a value in seeing our children every day, right? There's a value in
Hmm.
seeing your son watch you go to work every day to take care of them and coming home and spending as much time as you possibly can with them, or acknowledging them, or at least having a conversation with them. How was your day? What did you do? To
Right.
understand who your children are. And I think kids are very forgiving. They understand you can't spend 24 hours with them, but they see that you're trying. They see that you're putting in an effort. Um, and I think that that effort, that step, that action behind that effort is really, really important. So yeah, you might have to work 8 to 12 hours in a particular day, but at least come home and acknowledge your children and show them that you care.
Yeah, I like that every day, And you also had a line that you felt like your dad didn't ask you any questions out of genuine curiosity, but out of sort of like formality, you know,
Right.
maybe not even listening. But I think that what you're describing is what we got. Be there every day and be present and invested at some period of time in that other person's life, like you would with any other human being you've shown interest. And as you said in the beginning, that you cared for.
Yeah, exactly. Um, if you love someone, you'll sacrifice for them. I think that's ultimately this comes down to. This book is a relationship book, right? It's about a relationship between the child and their parents. With examples where at least one or more parent has failed their child. And I have stories in there beyond my own personal story of parents who have failed their children, but they've all failed their relationship with their child. And in some circumstances, their children are crying for them over and over and over to give them another chance and constantly being disappointed, and they're being failed repeatedly. And I think we are failing in some ways in our relationships with our children. I know we like to see it as we are authority figures, which we are, right? But at the end of the day, we're developing a relationship with a child. When that baby is born, we are starting brand new with a relationship with our children. And we're just trying to develop it from there. And they deserve our relationship. They deserve the love and care that we are supposed to give them. You don't need a pat on the back for loving your child. It's supposed to be something that comes from the heart, and no one should push you. You know, my mother shouldn't be the one to tell my father to get involved in our lives. My father is the one who's supposed to do it because he wants to. You can't force someone to love, right? Just like Jesus, we have free will, right? We can reject Jesus Christ or we can go towards him, but we have free will to love Jesus or not. That's our choice. You can't force someone to love, and that's the entire point. All of this is relational.
And as you point out, sacrifice is the constant is a constant theme you have here in the book. If before you go, Adam, I'd love to just run through some comments, if you wouldn't mind,
Absolutely.
that we have here from some users, and I just see if I can get them up on my screen here. Don Hebine says Adam seems like a good soul. Another comment says the number one risk of abuse to children is a step parent, a boyfriend, girlfriend in the home.
Yeah.
Suzanne says, I think you can make an argument for quality versus quantity too with parents who are not married. So the type of time you're spending with them. But you did make an argument for every day. And I think there is an argument for quantity as well, to your point. Don't deal with a
Yeah.
Tuesday problem on Saturday.
Exactly. I agree.
Mysterium says, this man keeps it real. Here's one for you, Adam. Fire Sign says, why didn't you marry his mother so you could always see him? It's a fair question. You know, you said you
That
had
is
a
a great.
kid and you're not married to the mother, and you talked about the divorce is something that should require sacrifice. How come you didn't marry your I don't know, you have a son, I think, right? Is it a son or a
Yes.
daughter?
A son. He's 19.
Yeah, there you go. Why didn't you marry your son's mother?
That's a fair criticism, and also something that I've criticized myself in different writings and stuff. I grew up repeating what I knew. I didn't understand the importance of marriage. I didn't understand the importance of even family planning. That wasn't like a concept to me. I was chasing girls who liked me, and I engaged in sex, and I was looking for acceptance. At one point, I did want to have a relationship with her, but it didn't work out. And I think that, and this is, I love my son with all my heart, so this is not a regret or anything like that, just being very open and transparent. If I was doing it all over again, I probably wouldn't have been in that circumstance. Um, but I think
Right.
the main difference is that I'm not a perfect parent, and I'm not claiming to be one, and I'm not chastising other parents. What I'm saying is the difference with my mistake is I'm telling my son not to repeat my mistake. I'm telling him there's a proper order to do this. I'm telling him to get married,
Right.
then have children, you know, and be there for your children. And I'm not making excuses for what I did.
Yeah. It's a really good answer. And then finally, my Brule story says, I can relate to this guy. I'm very happy to see him succeed and standing strong. And you can read all about it, by the way, in The Children We Left Behind. It is on sale tomorrow, Adam, right? There's an
Yes.
excerpt in the New York Post. And you can keep up with Adam at his Substack, Speaking Wrong at the Right Time. Type in adambcoleman.com. Check out The Children We Left Behind. It's always a fascinating conversation, Adam. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.